All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher here with a less forlorn Drew Dinsick after the mighty Raiders pulled out the victory over Zach Wilson and his friends. Kept on waiting for it, Drew, for the moment where Zach Wilson finally wouldn't see a linebacker, and it finally happened on the decisive play of the game. No, he was moving the ball a bit before that. Anyway, today we're going to talk about some injuries in the NFC South, a division that needs to recede or be relegated. Then we'll talk stock up, stock down with the Texans and your New York Jets. And then we'll close out by talking about Coach of the Year, which is, I think, an awards market that has kind of crystallized over the weekend. But we'll get into that. But let's start off talking about the New Orleans Saints, who are about to head on by. Derek Carr, right shoulder injury. Seems like that has been cleared of damage, but he is in concussion protocol. I would expect that he's probably going to be fine for their next game. Marshall and Lattimore, not as fine, carted off with a significant injury, they say. And then Michael Thomas, for what it's worth, also it looks like he has a significant injury too. How do you price the Saints going forward? Do you think that they justify their red odds to win the division at the moment?
Man, I have a bunch of Saints in my accounts, and I do not feel good. This team had the chance to put away the Vikings and kind of distance themselves from the Falcons. They didn't do it. Thankfully, the Falcons lost. Like, the Falcons beat the Cardinals yesterday. I think it's like every man your battle stations. Like, we got ourselves a problem. Like, this is going to be bad. And I think fair for me for the Saints is still -140, even in the absence of Lattimore, who matters a ton. Michael Thomas less so, because you do have an emerging set of wide receivers there that you can backfill his contributions. So I really just want to zero in on this defense. The Saints defense got abused yesterday. It was really, really strange seeing the way that Kevin O'Connell sat down and came up with a game plan and just really, really beat up that group. It was not an especially effective pass rush. That has kind of been their problem all season. And they've just been playing, sound fundamentals, with Marshawn Lattimore being kind of a key component to shutting down some of the better wide receivers they've faced. But the facts of the matter are the Saints still control their own destiny to a degree. They have the easiest schedule remaining, which matters. They play no one in terms of high-quality quarterbacks except for Jared Goff between now and the end of the season. And it's not like anyone else in this NFC South is really coming for them. The Falcons certainly aren't. And the Buccaneers are a little bit of a roller coaster. I mean, nice win by them yesterday. It was a pretty clean win by them yesterday, but that's still not a team that you trust whatsoever up against a team with any semblance of quarterback play that is solid. And so I think ultimately the Saints still do get there. But we joked about how or we didn't really joke about it, but like, one of the key handicapping angles for the NFC playoff picture was only one team's going to get a bye here. Only one between the Eagles and the Cowboys is going to get a bye. Well, now the other one probably drawing the winner of this NFC South, and is going to be 8-point favorites on the road. So it's not exactly a bye, and you will have to then go on the road the following 2 weeks if you want to get to the NFC Championship game. So it's still an impediment not to win your division if you're Eagles or Cowboys right now. But certainly this looking like the Saints were going to put together something special, like a campaign that was going to actually make them, a legitimate NFC contender. That's out the window right now. These guys really are they're lacking at too many positions, and they're too inconsistent. And the coaching is hugely suspect. The offensive scheme is a joke. And I think realistically, like, even though you are now pivoting into a set of skill position players that all exceed with a little bit more aggressive play calling, I do trust Pete Carmichael to all of a sudden pull out the good plays, because it doesn't seem like he's got any. And so I think it's going to be a hard fought NFC South win for this Saints team that really could have done it a lot easier.
Yeah, I agree. I still would take them over the field, but that's, to me, getting closer and closer to a coin flip. I think the concern is that, it's interesting. It's easy to evaluate in retrospect, but their issue, as you noted, is on defense, is they don't really have a pass rush. And what Minnesota do have, with Christian Darrisaw back playing On Sundays, they have a really solid offensive line. They have two really good tackles in Darisaw and Brian O'Neill. They have Garrett Bradbury as a solid center, and Josh Dobbs just had a lot of time. And I don't think Josh Dobbs is very good. I think there is a reason that he was a backup for so long. I don't think this is Geno Smith last year. I don't think Dobbs is at that level. Someone who's been very invested in the Vikings the past 2 weeks. Watching Dobbs play, he has made some fantastic plays, but almost all with his legs outside of that one pristine touchdown throw to TJ Hawkinson over the middle, which was reminiscent of the throws that Brock Purdy makes to Brandon Ayuk, those kind of routes to go over the linebacker before the safety and in the sweet spot. But, I mean, yesterday Josh Dobbs had a PFF grade of 65, and that kind of matched what I saw, is that he got all the plaudits because of, his touchdown run where he turns around and goes to the left and that throw to Hawkinson, but they didn't do anything on offense in the second half. And I do think this New Orleans defense is still pretty good, but Lattimore going down is a huge deal because that was really the strength of the defense, is that Paulson Adebo has been awesome this season. And then you put that across the Lattimore, who started off the year, the first few weeks was close to the best cornerback in the league. He's tailed off a bit, but he's still good. And so now I think they're going to get a little bit more exposed. And it's just games like, a week ago or so, it was looking like New Orleans home to Detroit was a coin flip. Well, not anymore. The Lions are going to be 3-point favorites in that game, I would think, the way this is headed at the moment in New Orleans. So they've got problems. I think the good thing is that Chris Olave really woke up for the first time in what feels like forever. He was a monster against the Vikings, and he was the only reason that the Saints were back in the game on offense. They lose Michael Thomas, but having Olave, I think Thomas going down will just mean more Rashid Shaheed as well, which I think will benefit them.
It should be good.
They have so many good players. Between Olave, Shaheed, Taysom Hill, the way he can be used. Alvin Kamara looks a lot healthier and more athletic than years past, where he's constantly dealing with niggling injuries. So when they have talent on the team, the O-line isn't great, but it's not, it's not the Jets O-line, and Carr is fine. He's what he is. He's the 19th best quarterback in the league. So I think ultimately they will be fine, but it's going to be a grind. And I think it's going to come down to these two games against Atlanta. If they split them, I think they should win the division. And also, the sneaky thing, though, is that the Bucs coming into this now, Bucs have the first half of the tiebreak with New Orleans, and that second game is in Tampa Bay. So a bit messy. I have some Saints division as well, and I don't feel amazing about it. I also don't want to think about it, though. I don't like this division. Let's talk about the Falcons before we move off of it. Taylor Heineke, he strained his hamstring, left the game, and did not return. Desmond Ridder came in and ran for a touchdown, didn't do a ton. What does this do for how you price the Falcons moving forward?
Yeah. So in preparation for this discussion, I'll just preface this by saying I came into this exercise more concerned about Tampa stealing than Atlanta, and I still feel that way. Tampa has 4 of their next 5 on the road, including games against San Francisco, who they will get buried by, presumably, against Indianapolis, who might be somewhat plucky, and then Atlanta and Green Bay, who, if they lose 3 of these next 5, I think they're pretty much out of it. Atlanta, on the other hand, I don't know how you salvage this season. It seems like what we're getting from Art Smith right now in terms of his vision as to what he wants this team to be on offense is completely at odds with how they are rostered, and completely at odds with how you win football in today's NFL. So I don't know if there's a saving this. I don't know if he's the guy to turn this around. And I think he is obviously feeling some of the pressure that has gone along with, underperforming to the 4-6 record that they've gotten so far this season. Some of their 4 wins were pretty doggone lucky when you look back on it too. My goodness gracious, this Falcons team, this thing could have gotten off the rails like Panthers off the rails kind of outcomes here. And I think it's not out of the realm of possibility that that's where this thing finally lands once we get to the month of December, even though they have the third easiest schedule from here on out. Their next game hosting the New Orleans Saints, I would expect them to be home dogs. When they go on the road at Zach Wilson's aforementioned Jets, I would expect them to be somewhere in the 2.5 to 3 point dogs. And that's entirely based on the strength of the Jets defense, nothing to do with the strength of the offense for the Jets. So, dogs here now twice, small dogs under 3 the next 2 weeks. And then you're home versus Tampa, where, now you're probably favored in that one. So it's going to be interesting to kind of get a read with how the market adjusts them, because right now I think market ratings would say they're going to be small favorites in those next 2 games, whereas I think they're going to actually close dogs. And, Desmond Ridder is the right choice as far as like, he has a higher ceiling than Heineke. We've talked about this. You made a pretty salient point in that regard last week, I thought. And, Heineke is a low ceiling guy that is not going to get you enough wins to get to the playoff picture this year. And he's just going to be in the way of you evaluating Ridder. So if you have something there, you need to see and figure out what you've got with Ridder. I guess credit to Ridder for getting the ball into the end zone instead of fumbling it into the end zone yesterday. That's progress. Just in general, like he looked a little bit kind of renewed from some of his time on the bench. So maybe he plays with a little bit more spirit and a little bit less, kind of lackadaisical mistake ridden football. So Falcons defense, I'm ready to write off. I thought they had a chance to finish in the top 10 after looking at that roster in the preseason, but the Grady Jarrett loss is huge. And just in general, you can't get it done with just safety play. The cornerback play has slid to the point where you can now throw on this team, and that's a problem when you're not getting any kind of pass rush.
Yep, I agree. Look, I think the way to bet this division at the moment is, so Falcons and Saints are both on bye this week coming up. Right now, I make the Bucs like the slightest of value against the market to win the division, but so close to neutral that it's not really even worth it. But here's what I would do, is I would wait for San Francisco to beat Tampa Bay by 50 points this week and hope that the market overreacts a little bit to a game that Tampa was almost certainly always going to lose anyway, and then jump on the Bucs at that point. Because after they lose to San Francisco in San Francisco, in a line that opened 10 and I think is going to close like 13 and a half, honestly, like that kind of range. Maybe not quite that big, but close. After that, at Indy, Carolina, at Atlanta, at Green Bay, home Jacksonville. They have another game against Carolina, and then they play at home to New Orleans in week 17. And if they win that game, just one home game against a very flawed team, then they'll have gone 2-0 against New Orleans, have the tiebreak wrapped up. So I think the Bucs are the play, but I would wait.
You think market right now would tell you you're going to get Bucs at around a pick 'em at Indy, at Atlanta, at Green Bay, and definitely a favorite at Carolina. So the market probably going to be, they're going to make them favorites on the road 4 times down the stretch. Even if it's kind of right around a pick 'em, you think you could do better betting those game by game than just taking a price? Like I guess what's the buy point? Like if 3-1 is not good enough to get involved now, you wait till there's no reaction after they get thumped by Niners. You want 5-1, I guess. Is that the target?
I think so. I mean, it depends. I think that kind of stuff, it depends on what the price goes back up at. If they're going to go up at 5-1, go from 3-1 to 5-1 after they lose a game that San Francisco is going to be like minus 1,000 to win, then yes, I think that's a great bet. But yeah, let's see what they go back up at. But I think this team is, Baker Mayfield has better EPA this year than Lamar Jackson. Baker Mayfield's been fine. He's been an average quarterback, maybe even slightly above average at times. Doesn't look pretty at all, but he's been able to get results, particularly against weaker teams. So
he's top 9. He's top 9 right now in total EPA generated.
That's crazy. He's not good.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't get it either. But the results are there. And in Evans, he's got a legit, number 1, and Godwin. I've always liked Rashad White, even though he runs for 3.9 yards a pop. I don't think that's his fault. But yeah, I don't think
he's had more juice lately.
Yes. Yeah. He's looked a little bit better. He had a shoulder thing that he carried into the Bills game, and then he really didn't look good in that game. And then he's been a bit better. And they manhandled Tennessee. Yeah. All right. That's enough about the NFC South. Let's move on to the AFC South. But first, Sunday Night Football, Drew, is headed to the altitude this week when Josh Dobbs and the Vikings travel to Denver for a battle with Russell Wilson and the Broncos. Coverage of the interconference matchup begins at 7 p.m. Eastern, only on NBC and Peacock. We'll talk a bit more about those Minnesota Vikings when we get to Coach of the Year. But first, another Coach of the Year candidate, second favorite in the market, which I don't necessarily agree with, but he's in the mix. DeMeco Ryans, his team, the Texans, Massive winner out of week 10. Not only do they win as 5.5-point dogs to Cincinnati, the Jags lose, and now all of a sudden the AFC South feels quite up for grabs, even if Jacksonville still are a fairly clear favorite. But to me, the Texans at the moment might be the most difficult team to get one's head around, because see, all the buzz at the moment is CJ Stroud MVP. I think this is just a more fake version of the Joe Burrow MVP buzz coming out of last week. And next week we'll have the real MVP buzz about who wins between Mahomes and Hurts. But Stroud's numbers, to me, the most fascinating thing there is that, or the most indicative thing is that when he is kept clean, he's the best quarterback in the NFL. Basically, which is astounding for that to happen with a rookie, and with weapons that are good, but there are other quarterbacks who have better weapons, and he's still able to do that. He was excellent against the Bengals despite a couple of turnovers. But to me, Drew, the big takeaway out of Sunday for the Texans is that their defense looked pretty solid against Joe Burrow after Burrow had completely lit up the Bills and the Niners. What do you think the ceiling of this Texans team is? Do you think that they're now a better team than average on neutral, or do you think that it's just been a fortuitous couple of weeks? And including in one of those weeks, they won by 2 against the Bucs, so it's not the most impressive victory.
No, it's not. But yesterday's was.
Yes.
Not just because they were, almost touchdown dogs. And you ended up going up against not a full strength Bengals team because Higgins was unavailable, but Chase was out there running routes, and they pretty clearly had kind of a tailored game specific game plan that they wanted to try to run, and it didn't really work after the scripted portion. And I don't know if you've rewatched this or not, but I rewatched the game. The Bengals scored on their opening touchdown again.
Yeah,
that was a laborious drive. It was real tough for them to matriculate down the field. They had to get a very, very close call 4th down conversion that was thrown well behind the sticks. I don't really know what the concept was there, but they got it. And then a jailbreak, or not a jailbreak, but just a beautiful, kind of identification of Burrow seeing that Irwin was going to be streaking down the sidelines to get the touchdown, ultimately gave them that lead. But you watch that first drive and you're like, oh, man. Texans defense came to play today. Like, these guys are sharp. They're rallying. They're not giving up anything on the ground. And you're seeing some guys and some names who weren't really part of that starting unit, which I think matters, because when we looked at this roster in the offseason, there wasn't a lot of star power. There wasn't a lot of name brand recognition, but there was a lot of good players. And some of those good players were in the second unit on defense. And you kind of knew, or suspected, that as the season went along, if these guys were hanging in there and winning games and, they were getting to do some self-evaluation, they were going to figure out who they actually wanted on the field as their starting defense. And the guys that they have out there now are playing really, really well. And it's tough to have a measured take on this because of the fact that they went against the Bengals and they went against Joe Burrow, and they clearly won that head to head, in my opinion. If it was not for, some short fields and some turnovers, they would have cleanly won that head to head. And that matters because Burrow and the Bengals are a top 5 offense. And so that is what you're ceiling as a defense, that we got to pay attention to it. I will only kind of caution some optimism by the idea of DeMeco Ryans' commentary today when he was pushed was very much like, this was our best week of practice of the season. Like, everybody kind of came out of that Bucs game, and instead of a deep sigh of relief, hey, we won a close one, that was exciting, we're really good, we're reading our clippings, it was much more of a, hey, we're not at our final form yet, we need to keep working hard, we need to keep building. And they pretty clearly showed up very focused and very, very ready to play that game against the Bengals, and it was obvious. I think if you get that level of defensive performance on any given Sunday for this Texans team, you have a very, very real chance to win, regardless of how well CJ Stroud is playing, which brings us finally to that point, which is quarterback play is so weak across the league right now. He is so clearly top 10. It's not really even a worth having the argument about. Which means if you have a top 10 quarterback, are you above average team in the NFL? Absolutely. Clearly, yes. And so doing what he did yesterday and having, that kind of a performance with a couple of mistakes, sprinkled in on the road against the Lou Anarumo defense. Yeah. Okay. Like that was still incredibly impressive. And I think, it's maybe more instructive to take away some of what is going on with the Bengals defense. But the fact that they did that without Nico Collins, incredible. The fact that they got what they got from Devin Singletary, they might have figured out that he's a better threat than Pierce. I mean, the running game was an enormous minus for this offense for the entire season so far, to the point where CJ Stroud had to sit down with the Slowick and say, put it more on my shoulders. We got to get some of these minus EV runs out of here. And well, if you have Singletary in the backfield and he's got more pop, more life, more, if he's bringing more juice, then now you might have a balanced attack and things could get really interesting. So could the Texans steal the South? Yes. Could the Texans continue to get some of these hard-fought wins as we go through the rest of the season, considering how easy their schedule is? Absolutely. But there's probably a little bit of overreaction to that result and the fact that they had such an incredible week of practice, as stated by Ryans, that has me kind of a little bit surprised that you saw as big a number as you did on the open against Arizona. But that said, this is probably like the surprise team of the year, who the market has a difficult time pricing until we finally get to the point where they're overrated clearly in market and they lose. And then we know that was the inflection point, but we're not there yet. And if they win and cover against Arizona, then I think you can continue to see market upgrading these guys.
Yeah, they're a difficult team to evaluate because 15 days ago they lost to Carolina, and they deserved to lose that game. Carolina were the better team there. That wasn't some fluky outcome, I didn't think. And then like the 2 games prior to that, they eked out a win against New Orleans, where New Orleans were missing field goals and couldn't convert key downs, and Stroud threw for less than 200 yards and wasn't great. And then the week before that, they lost to Desmond Ridder. So I don't really understand what this team is. I think that when you look at the personnel, it looks pretty good now that Tunsil is back, along with Titus Howard, who hasn't been good but still should get better, with Shaq Mason providing more competence in the interior of the line. And then you look at what Tank Dell is doing with Noah Brown as well, who's been a monster. And what Stroud is doing. I think the offense is just above average going forward. So the question is about the defense, which coming into yesterday was bottom 10 in the league in EPA. And we'll get to coach of the year, but I think that's D'Amico Ryans' problem with his case, is that, he's a defensive coach and it's an offensive team. This is CJ Stroud's team at the moment. This isn't D'Amico Ryans' team. If they go 12-5 and win the division, then it might become overwhelming, but I think there are other candidates, so we'll get to that. But I think with the defense, now that, look, they have pedigree on this team, and now that Stingley is back, like Stingley wasn't good last year, but he was also the 3rd pick in the draft, and he's in year 2, and he's been injured all year. Now he's back. You put him opposite Shaq Griffin, who's fine as a corner. Will Anderson is fantastic. Sheldon Rankins is a monster yesterday. So they have talent on this defense. At the same time, like if Tyler Boyd catches that touchdown, they give up 31 points and probably lose to the Bengals, despite Joe Burrow throwing a couple of picks. So I don't really know what to make of the defense. I'd probably say it's going to be slightly below average going forward, and the offense is probably slightly above average. And you've got a pretty average team that's pretty average on neutral. And in this division against the Jags team that is kind of flailing, that might be enough to win it, particularly because it's very possibly going to come down to the game in 2 weeks, where Houston hosts Jacksonville. If they win that, they lock up the tiebreak. And if they've beaten Arizona prior to that, then they'll go top of the division with an easy schedule to come. They still get 2 games against Will Levis. So yeah, I think the Texans are legitimate, at least in terms of being able to win the division. Beyond that, I don't think there's too much cooking. Let's talk about the Jets quickly. They are now 4-5 after that loss against the Raiders in inglorious fashion. And their next 2 games are against the Bills and Dolphins. And I don't really see how this offense is going to keep up were those two teams that have very high floors on offense. And I know that the Jets beat the Bills in week 1. Josh Allen also threw 3 picks in that game, and they needed a miracle kick return to win it. So I'm not sure that is very repeatable. Do you have any hope for the Jets going forward? Do you think that they can hang around long enough in the playoff picture that we're still thinking about Aaron Rodgers coming back in week 17, or do you think they'll be out of it by then?
I think they'll be out of it by then. This is another tough one, man. The defense is top 5. They're healthy. They play extremely hard week in, week out. Their coach continues to, kind of let them down, I guess, by
They're not a well-coached team with the penalties and the lack of any offense. There's just nothing.
And then first question every Monday morning. Hey, coach, you scored 1 offensive touchdown in the last 3 weeks. What's the plan at quarterback? We're sticking with Zach. That's got to be wearing on these guys. I mean, they're all pros. They're all, they're playing for future contracts. They are playing for pride, and they're going to continue to prepare and work hard, I would assume, on defense. But they've been very, very lucky in terms of injury on the defensive side of the ball so far. A couple of tough ones here, and then all of a sudden the picture looks very different about them being able to stay in games with their defense. And there's no help coming anytime soon offensively. If Aaron Rodgers is for real and he's going to try to make a comeback in mid-December here, I mean, it's going to be too little, too late, likely. And this Jets team is it's tough to price, considering how lopsided the offense and the defense are. I think this is very clearly a bottom 5 offense in the NFL. I don't really think that's worth arguing. And I think it's pretty clearly a top 5 defense, and that makes them unique. And it makes them interesting. And thankfully, they're going to have entertaining games here. But Zach Wilson's major problems and his flaws are pretty well documented at this point. Like, he's going to be able to do some things. They need to do a better job of identifying those things that he's good at, get him into the game plan, get him into save them for some high leverage situations. Because, a couple of key plays in that game last night, and they win that pretty comfortably. And ultimately they find themselves at a deficit late, and you're asking Zach Wilson to do something miraculous. The defense gets a key turnover to give you another chance, and he just goes down the field and then throws, just as you mentioned, pretty easy pick to read as he's staring down his wide receiver for 2.5 seconds before he releases the ball. So it's not a great situation, obviously, and I think realistically, you have to kind of go pretty far into the archives of finding a team that's this healthy and this good on defense that has this weak of an offense in order to come up with a fair rating. But these next 2 weeks against the Bills and the Dolphins look like problems. And if there's any injury or any sign of quit from the Jets defense, then I don't think I can blame them.
Yeah. I think the other thing too with the Jets is that there's a lot of optimism about them after they beat Philadelphia and got into the bye 3-3, having weathered the brutal early part of their schedule, because then it was going to get easier. Well, the easy part of the schedule was 3 games after the bye, and they've gone 1-2. And now these other easy games that they've got, like home to Houston was supposed to be an easy game. That's not. They might be dogs in that game at this point if Stroud keeps on doing this. And then they've just got other landmines, like they've got to play Miami twice. They have to play Buffalo this week. They got to play at Cleveland. They're going to be significant dogs in that game. Even a home game against Washington, that's no layup at the moment. So, I mean, their one arguable layup is at New England, and that's in week 18, and very likely that's not going to mean anything. So, not feeling too optimistic about the Jets. They just seem to have no upside on offense between Wilson and Mr. Hackett. Mr. Hackett will not be part of our Coach of the Year discussion for the last segment. But before we get to that, a reminder that Saturday, November 18th at 11 a.m. Eastern, Vaughn Dalzell, Brad Thomas, and Eric Froton are answering your college football betting questions for Week 12, including Brock Bowers and Georgia traveling to Neyland Stadium for a showdown against SEC East rival Tennessee.
Wow.
All right. Coach of the Year. Now, I think this has kind of come down to 5 candidates where Dan Campbell is the favorite in the market at plus 150. He's followed by D'Amico Ryans, Mike McDaniel, Kevin O'Connell, and Mike Tomlin. Nick Sirianni is next. If Nick Sirianni goes 16-1, I could see it. Outside of that, I think he's going to be in some trouble. I now have an organizing theory about this market, Drew, and I'm keen for your thoughts on it. So the Lions, this market, you have to start with Dan Campbell and the Lions, particularly after what he did on Sunday, going for it on that 4th down, getting the win, going to 7-2. Their next 5 games are an absolute cupcake. It is comical how easy their schedule is. They play home to Chicago, home to Green Bay, at New Orleans. Lattimore's almost certainly going to be out for that. At Chicago, home Denver. So I would say that your modal outcome there is going 4-1. And everyone look at that and be like, oh, they're not going to lose any of these games. Well, they're probably going to lose one of those games because that's just what happens is you lose one. And so let's say that they get to their final 3 games at 11-3. Okay. My thought is that their final 3 games, which are at Minnesota, at Dallas in prime time, home Minnesota. I think if Dan Campbell goes 2-1 or better in those games, he will win Coach of the Year. I think if he has 2 or more losses in those games, then Kevin O'Connell or Mike Tomlin will win Coach of the Year. What do you think of that?
I think it comes down to that first game against Minnesota, because that win likely clinches NFC North.
Yes.
And if you clinch that early and you dispatch one of the other prime candidates for Coach of the Year in the same swoop, then you've made it easy for the voting block to just decide and then check out of the last 2 games.
Yeah.
And
I think that's the Dallas game might have 1 seed ramifications is the only thing in week 17 or 2 seed ramifications. And it's in prime time on a Saturday night. I think that if he were to lose that game by 20, which is possible because it's Dallas and they're really good, then I think that would make it tougher. But I think if he's got 2 wins against O'Connell sandwiching that game, then I think he will still win. But I mean, I think Coach of the Year is, in a way, the toughest award to handicap because, like, if you told me that Doug Peterson in 2017 or 2018, if you told me he went from 7-9 to 13-3 and a 1 seed with his quarterback getting injured for the last month of the season, and he got 1 out of 50 Coach of the Year votes, I would have said that's completely insane. But this award changes on a whim with narratives, with what ignites in the media. And to me, it's mainly about just being able to kind of frame what a given coach's win condition is, how likely they are to get there, and then how much the story will resonate. And I think a fun and useful way to talk about that is to be like, all right, if this coach is at this record, does he beat this coach at that record? So my question for you is, Dan Campbell gets to 13-4 and wins the division and is, say, a 2 seed. Yeah. Do you think he beats Mike Tomlin winning the AFC North at 11 or 12 wins?
I do. And I think it's Sacramento Kings-esque, right? It's a little bit of the, hey, this has been a long time coming for the city of Detroit.
It'll be the greatest Lions season in history. Literally.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And first Lions home playoff game since 1990?
Maybe
has it been that long? Oh my God. Oh my God. If that happens, that's a powerful narrative. And I think Tomlin, he is going to need Dan Campbell to fumble the bag here to a degree. And your point about the upcoming schedule for the Lions cuts both ways, because if they do their job and they win these games, then that sets them up to seal the deal against the Vikings. If they struggle, it will be held against them that they're losing to bad teams. And the defense, the way that they played yesterday, they could lose to bad teams. I think you make a good point. Like 4-1, yeah, that sounds about right. But if it's 3-2, if it's 2-3, if they slip up against some teams that are truly thought of as non-contenders here, then it'll hurt him. And that's kind of the only way I see for Tomlin at the moment, just because, again, like it's going to be so much tougher for them to actually get to a winning record and win the North. I think.
Well,
So who
The
knows?
losses, the Baltimore and Cincinnati losses helped them
Oh,
a ton.
tremendously.
So now they're live. And I mean, I'm very low on the Steelers. I think they are worse than your average team on neutral. And I think that the Ravens are a juggernaut. I think that Cleveland are solidly above average and the Bengals in between Baltimore and Cleveland. And I still make the Pittsburgh Steelers plus 550 fair to win the division, even
Amazing.
given all that, just because of their schedule upcoming. And so I don't know. I think if Tomlin and Campbell have the same record and they're both division winners, I think Tomlin has to win in that situation because it's almost certainly means that Campbell's had 3 more losses between now and the end of the season because I don't think the Steelers are getting to 13 wins. So I think that Tomlin, I mean, there's still some Tomlin like 18-1 about. Like that's too big. If they're plus 550 or remotely close to that to win the division, then I think he's got to be shorter than that number.
Yeah.
Another one for you in terms of comparing cases, if Tomlin and Kevin O'Connell have the same record and both win their division, who do you think would win?
This one's tough, man.
So I think that's like a proper coin flip.
Yes, that's kind of where I'm at. I would lean Tomlin, but just because for some reason, like last week, it felt like the Kevin O'Connell Coach of the Year, like liftoff, didn't really get there. Nationally, I'm not sure why, because that was such a good story.
I mean, they were 5-4 at the time.
Yeah,
yeah,
and then this week you would have thought, well, wow, now there's really nothing. Now what else would you rather write about? Look what the Vikings did, but it fell flat relative to some of the other results yesterday for some reason. So I don't have a good read on why exactly Kevin O'Connell's case is not tracking what it ought to, and I think that's.
I can tell you why. It's because Josh Dobbs is like Linsanity at the moment.
I guess
Dobbs
so.
is the story. But I think that, one, Dobbs is going to have a game in the next couple of months where he throws 2 or 3 picks and they lose. And then the shine will be off because he's not that good. He's fine. He's competent. But he's going to, people are talking about him as, QB1 going forward for a team. Like the Vikings can move on from Kirk Cousins because Josh Dobbs is the guy of the future. I'm not quite there. Like maybe he'll get to that level by the end of the season, but I don't think that we can just pencil that in after 2 games. I think that O'Connell doesn't have the vibes at the moment because they're 6-4 and this is new and it's all Dobbs. If he beats Dan Campbell in week 16 and knocks out another coach of the year candidate, all of a sudden I think the vibes come flowing in. So I think that if he takes care of business there, that is his path. And if he wins the division, which is about 8-1 to do so, then I think he will win Coach of the Year, barring Tomlin. And even if Tomlin wins, I think that's a 50-50 coin flip. We spoke about D'Amico Ryans. I think the other guy who is 3rd in the odds at the moment is Mike McDaniel, who, I mean, books haven't written him off because he's 3rd in the odds. I think that most people like us have probably written him off because he's got 3 losses and he's 0-3 in big games. What I would say there is that his last 3 games of the season, again, this is a narrative award, last 3 weeks of the season, particularly week 16 and 17 are the highest leverage games for this award. He plays home Dallas, at Baltimore, home Buffalo. That is exactly what Mike McDaniel's Coach of the Year case needs because he's coming from behind now, so he needs high variance. And those games, they can wash away the stench if he doesn't win any big games. If they go into Baltimore in week 17 and beat the Ravens, all of a sudden this team is fake. That's washed away. I still think he would need the 1 seed and Dan Campbell to have 5 losses, but that's viable. I would just have him. I'd have him the same kind of tier as Ryan. I'd have him slightly behind Ryan's, and I would have Campbell tier 1, O'Connell and Tomlin tier 2, and then Ryans and McDaniel tier 3. But what do you think of McDaniel before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, I've written him off because of all the points you made and the fact that it's the middle of November and a team from Miami not having already sealed up any kind of offensive based recognition for them being the best of anything is a problem. That Ravens game in particular, like those aren't the kind of games that for whatever reason a Miami team goes in and wins. Like on the road in January, it doesn't happen very often for whatever reason. And they've also got the looming, specter of health kind of dictating a lot of stuff. Like if Waddle, Hill, and Tua aren't all healthy, then is that offense putting up the same amount of points that they did early this season? Like the further we get from 70 points against the Broncos, the less inspiring his case feels like. And so I'm ready to clear out, any realistic hope that McDaniel can win. I also think that there's probably a little bit of a bias among the commentariat about the NFL who likes McDaniel more so than the old school writers for whatever reason. I don't know that he resonates as well with the people who are actually in the voting block. So that's worth kind of thinking about. Whereas Ryan's maybe does, right? His case is there's probably a subset of the 50 voters who are like, the Texans exceeded their win expectation more than anyone else. They get the vote for coach of the year, period. And what cracks me up is there were people writing about like, Ryan should he get coach of the year consideration. There are people writing about Nick Caserio should get executive of the year consideration. Do people forget that these guys didn't want CJ Stroud?
Yeah.
And then that the owner basically enforced CJ Stroud, and that he's the reason that the Texans are succeeding. Like that would just be, again, like it could happen, and we would probably swear off voting coach of the year markets forever, but it would be wildly unjust, I think.
Yeah, I think Ryans can absolutely win if he wins the division, but I think he has a tougher path to 11, 12 wins than Campbell has to 13 wins. And also Campbell doesn't have a quarterback who's stealing credit away from him, and Ryans has the quarterback right now who's the kind of hottest subject in the NFL. And Tomlin has a quarterback who adds credit to Tomlin. And O'Connell right now is a quarterback stealing credit from him, but I don't necessarily think that will be the case come the end of the season. But interesting. You've written off Mike McDaniel. They'll be about plus 325, plus 350 to sweep Dallas and at Baltimore back to back. They do that and get the 1 seed. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins, but he is coming from a fair way back, and he can probably only afford one more loss maximum the rest of the way. So I agree, he's not in that top 4 with those 4 guys. He's behind them, and it's very hard to see at this point anyone else winning. I mean, Shanahan can run the slate. Shanahan's like 11-1 now to run the slate and go 14-3 and almost certainly get the 1 seed. So he would probably be the 6th guy for me, but I don't think he's going to win at this point. No. I think it's probably going to be Dan Campbell. All right. Before we go, a reminder to check out NBCSports.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thank you for those watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. Please rate and subscribe if you're listening to us in podcast form. And a reminder to find all your favorite NBC Sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports. From Jay Croucher and Drew Dinsick, we'll see you tomorrow.